Hi, welcome to day one of this Replit course. Let's build a Sketch app. I'm Brian Meermans, an instructor at the entirely online tech education school, BloomTech. At BloomTech, we're all about teaching people like you the skills you need to get a great tech job. That's what we'll be doing in this class. We'll be getting the foundational Java skills that can lead to a fantastic career. Our main goals of the day is to first understand how to navigate Replit. Second, to write our first lines of Java code, which will run specific actions, which we call methods. Ultimately, we'll be setting up the background images for the Sketchpad app that we'll be building.
The first thing you ever do before actually writing any code is get used to the interface you're about to work in. We're on the Replit website. Fantastic for writing code, especially early on in your career, where you're just kind of getting used to things. The website has lots of customization, so I want to make certain you see some of it, but I'm certainly not going to go through all of it. First, you're currently watching a video down here in tutorial. This video is actually an overlay, and you're allowed to take it and drag it wherever you want, which is fantastic. Every once in a while, you're going to find out that the video is covering something you need to see, so you might want to drag it and move it around. You're also allowed to make it as big or as small as you want by grabbing one of the corners and making it bigger and smaller. And sometimes it's going to be important to close it because you just need the screen real estate. It's just super important to see more. And if you close it, you want to know how to open it again. In the tutorial pane, the top button right here says Show Tutorial Video, and it'll repop it up back in the bottom right corner. So get used to using the video tutorial buttons and opening and closing things you need to. Pause when you need to take a moment to actually code on your own. You don't want to keep going with the video. Get used to it. You're going to use it. Second is the actual tutorial pane on its own. So this pane is a great place for you to read what you're seeing about. What I would personally recommend is you walk through with the video, follow along, and then you come back and look at the tutorial and read about it and see, oh, that's what was just talked about. And this is the different wording of it. The tutorial over here tells you like, what are the key concepts today? What are we about to do? What's the objective? And then it has left and right buttons to go backwards and forwards. So if you click the right button, you go to the next part of the tutorial. You can see, hey, we're on the processing library, whatever that means. And some of these have drop downs, so you can actually see more details. If you'd like to read more details about everything, then pull down the drop downs, read more about it. We won't always cover every single thing in a video because this is meant to be a starting point. Also, there's a table of contents, which is fantastic. So if you want to skip around and say, hey, I'd like to do the drawing shapes part of things, and you can go over here and see how to draw shapes, you can skip right to it. And that covers the video part and the tutorial part. And I just want to make certain you know that this is all 100% customizable. So if you like to have your tutorial on the right, you can grab the entire pane. You could pull it into there to make it a tab. You could pull it to the right or the top and put it on anywhere you want to. You can do whatever you want with this. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it on the left for the moment. Everything else is also just tabs. So if you want these to move around, you can actually drag the console and the shell around. You won't be using those. But the last thing we really need to focus on is this top left button over here that says open the sidebar. This is going to be immensely important, because the sidebar is where we're going to find the individual files for our projects that we're working on. So when you open up the sidebar, you'll see two parts, the Files section and the Tools section. The Files section will have the part that we're writing code for. The tutorial itself is written there, so you don't need to modify that. The build is where all of our code, when it actually gets converted over to machine-readable code, will be put in the build, so you don't have to worry about that. But this bottom two here, this documentation and the source, not so much the library, documentation is going to be a location where we'll find individual information about some of the things we work on. So for example, we're going to be working with a drawing app where we're going to draw things and have colors. So we've got to click the color and pull it up and find out information, documentation about colors in our Java program. And then finally, the source folder lets you look more specifically at individual pieces of code. We're going to be working with code, and that's where the source folder goes. So in Java, when you write code, you put it in the source folder. The Sketchpad, for example, is what we're working on. And the Sketchpad right here, .java, is our main one we work on. Now watch right here a second. I'm currently got the color tab open. If I click the Sketchpad, it will replace the color tab. And if I go up here and click the color, it'll replace the Sketchpad. So it replaces the current one you're on. You're allowed to make a new tab by hitting the plus button, and then you can go wherever you want. So maybe I want the Sketchpad on that one. Or you can click the ... and decide I like to open that in a new tab. So highly, highly customizable. One last thing. If you ever accidentally close the tutorial, you can always open it again from the tools down here. So you just click the tools and you'll find the tutorial again. We won't be working with any other parts in here unless you want to work on it on your own and just explore. But for the most part, here's the main concepts. You need a video that is movable, as you need to know how to open and close. If you close it, you got to open it with the show tutorial video. You have a tutorial that you can scroll through. Maybe you like to have the tutorial at its own location and you can make it its own pane. So I can decide, hey, let's push this over there. You have a sidebar that you can open and close, and the sidebar lets you find the individual files, and then you have individual tabs you can have open. My preferred format for doing all of this is probably going to have a large section for the code, and maybe my documentation over on a smaller section that I can get bigger and smaller, and maybe the tutorial a little bit smaller. That's probably my preferred somewhat format. We're also going to have an output that is going to appear somewhere. We don't need it all the time, but that's going to be the actual program running. And I'll probably run it over in this area over here. Are you ready to get started with the Java? Let's see first what we're going to do, and let's make certain our program actually runs. So let's go ahead and click this big green run button. It's going to take a little bit of time sometimes, but what's eventually going to happen is you're going to have an output tab open up. If the output tab doesn't open up on its own, you can always open it yourself by clicking this plus button and finding the output. But hopefully you get the output tab to open. And this is what we're working with now. We're literally starting with a blank screen. That's how far down you're going. Technically, there's some code going on in the background here that's making that screen appear, but we have nothing. And we're going to build, ultimately, a paint program out of this. So let's see what we're doing today. I'm going to look at the table of contents and what we're doing today. I'm going to first introduce you just briefly to what the processing library is. Processing is a library that lets you do graphics really quick in Java. So Java has lots of different ways to do graphics, and ultimately, when I write Java code, it's normally not a graphics-based program. It's normally a back-end part of a program, and the graphics are written in JavaScript or some other language that will go onto a website. But we're looking at the processing library. It's a library that has lots of built-in methods for drawing lines and rectangles and various other things, and colors. We're looking at some file structures to figure out how our files go together. We're going to look at how to read documentation, which means that we're going to be using this library called processing, which has all the abilities of drawing lines and rectangles and changing colors. We're going to figure out how to actually use that. We're first going to actually change this to not be this drab gray color anymore, but get a nice background color. We're going to make this be a vivid program that's nice and colorful. And then finally, we're going to draw some shapes. So we're just going to make certain we know how to put some shapes on the screen so we have the ability to make our screen look like something more than just a big gray window. Our ultimate goal is we're going to try to build a sketchpad that we can actually draw lines on top of. We won't be drawing the lines in this particular day's lesson, but in the next lesson we will be. So we want to be able to make a background with a part that we draw code onto that we actually have the ability to draw on top of. And that's our main goal here. It's kind of a neat little project. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. So I'm going to go back to the table of contents. I'm going to skip over to this. The processing library is the library that lets us do all the graphics. Our file structure. So let's take a look at this for a moment. We're going to find out on the left part, if you don't have the tab open here for our files, on the left part, you have two different locations we're looking at. The documentation folder is our main one. We're looking at what already exists, so we know what we can already use. And then the source folder is where we're going to be modifying a lot of code. And so in the source folder, this is where we put our Java code. We're eventually going to be working with buttons that we can click. We won't need those for a little bit. We'll be working with the sketchpad itself, which is going to define what does this whole thing look like? What's the interactions we can do with it? And then tools are all the things about processing. So I told you we brought this processing library in. We've broken those down for tools. So we have a color tool, a generator tool, a mouse info tool, a painting tool. And just as a brief idea, colors hold on to the ability to change colors and keep track of what a color is, whereas painting tool is used for actually drawing rectangles and lines and such. And the screen tool is going to be the actual entire background itself. We don't look in depth on those right now. We're going to leave those alone. We're going to be focusing on this sketchpad.java. So if you can click that, I'm going to put it in a new tab in my tutorial so I can go back and forth between those two things. So that's going to be something we're going to have open. At the moment, without knowing anything about Java, you'd be looking at this and thinking, I don't know what any of that means, and that's okay. We're going to be looking at this initial launch. Initial launch is going to be the code that runs when this program loads up. And we'll be putting our code that goes inside here as a place to write anything we want to happen. I'm going to use 2 forward slashes right now, and you don't have to type this on your end. This is just going to be a comment. What code will run when the program launches? So that's our goal. We're going to put some code in here to make our program run. Our main goal right now is to make it nice and colorful and then put a box on top of it and make sure we understand the coordinate system that we're going to be using. And so that's our main goal right now. All right. So going back to our table of contents, we're looking at reading documentation next. So there's these built-in actions that processing has that lets us draw rectangles and colors and everything else. Let's figure out what that documentation says. Let's start with the screen itself. So if you go into the documentation side, and you go ahead and click the ... and you open a tab for it. So you have the ability to see the screen documentation. Our first bit of Java here is to figure out what does it mean to use an action that already exists in Java? How do we run code that already exists? Because this screen.pdf is a documentation saying processing has already built this for us. These are the actions that can already be performed. And this is our first bit of learning here, learning how to write Java code. Is to learn how to call methods. I call methods constantly. And so learning that as your first step is actually kind of a neat idea. So you're learning it right away. So we're looking here is we have actions that already exist. These are called methods in Java, actions. This method is called get height. This one's called get width. This one's called set background color. This one's also called set background color. These are actions that Java can perform if we ask it to perform it. And these are just like in real life. If I asked you right now to tie your shoe, that is an action that you've memorized that you can perform thousands upon thousands of times in your lifetime. And it's just, hey, perform action, tie shoe. Maybe I didn't know your name. So if your name was Marcus, I might say, Marcus, tie shoe. That's what it'd be. So we're going to be using these actions in Java. To use an action in Java, you have to be able to read this decently well. Not fully, but decently well. The action name, for example, is set background color that I'm highlighting right here. And it requires us to send it a color. So I might say set background color to green, set background color to cyan, set background color to blue, whatever it is. And I also have to identify who is doing this action. Is it Marcus or is it Sue? Who is doing this action? And so for this to work in my code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the Sketchpad code. And when my program starts in this initial launch, I'd like to ask the screen to change its background color. Now, without getting into details right now, we have a name up here for the screen. The name of the screen is literally called lowercase screen. We could have called it anything. So this could have been called background. But that's just the screen's name. So I'm going to leave that alone for a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask that. That's like naming a person Marcus. Right? And I'm going to say screen. That's the person. That's the object I want to have do an action. And in Java, you ask a person or an object to do an action by putting a dot. So screen, I like you to do an action. Which action do I want them to perform? I'd like them to perform this action, this method called set background color. So I'm literally going to type it exactly as it is with the B capitalized and the C capitalized. So set background color. Screen, can you set background color? And then in parentheses, notice that this has parentheses as well. In parentheses, I need to tell it which color I'd like to set its background to. Well, how would we know what colors are available? Is the color mauve available? I don't know. So if you go back over to the documentation, there's a color documentation. Let's open that one. These are the built-in colors that are ready to go. We have black, blue, brown, cyan, dark gray, etc. There's all the colors available. To get to these, we're going to have to say the color name we want to use, say, for example, gray or lime or magenta. And to do that, we have to ask, who is trying to do this action? Well, we don't have a color variable. Over here, we had a screen variable that represents the entire background. We have mouse info variable called mouse info. We have a painting tool called paint. We don't have anything called color. And so to use it, without getting into details, this is static. We'll have to type color dot, literally the class name. So in the parentheses, I'm going to say color dot, and then we'll choose a color. So you can choose any color you like. I'm going to go with purple. So I'll do purple, color dot purple. And that purple is it. That's all it needs. Nothing else, no parentheses or anything like that, because it doesn't have anything on the end of it. Whereas this screen, the set background color had parentheses around it. We had to put parentheses around it and say, that's the color we want to change it to. And the last thing to finish our first line of code in Java is that Java needs to know that that line of code is over. This is not true in every other language. So if you're looking at Java and you've seen some language before, you'd be like, why would it need to know that? Java is very, very specific. You need to say that is the end of the line of code, and we use a semicolon to say, I'm done. So the dot is being used to ask someone else to do an action or ask someone else to use a value. So this says screen, perform your set background color action, your method. And then what color do we want to use? We want to use colors.purple capability. Let's see what happens. Let's start our code again and see what happens with our output. It takes a little moment to actually load this up. So hopefully we'll get a purple background. All right, you have written your very, very first line of code in Java. We have a purple colored background on our screen. If you'd like to have a different color background, your choice. Anything you want, go over to the colors and choose something else. If you like maroon, go ahead and choose maroon. Our next step is we have this screen and we're going to be placing things, but we're going to be drawing eventually on it. We want to know how the coordinates work on it. What does it mean for my mouse to be right about here? Where is that on the screen? And those have individual X and Y coordinates. So if you remember your math classes from X's and Y coordinates, how they work, it's a little bit different here. And so we want to make certain we understand what does it mean. And let's go ahead and do our first drawing on it. We're not drawing the entire screen this time. We're drawing a single individual object. So we're going to be using the paint. Paint lets us draw lines and rectangles and circles and whatever. So instead of screen dot, we'll do paint dot. And we'll figure out what actions we paints can do. So let's look at the painting tool because paint is a painting tool. Let's look at the options there. So I'm going to open that in a new tab. And let's see, we can draw circles, we can draw lines, we can draw rectangles, we can draw all kinds of things. Let's start with circles. To draw a circle, you have to give it a coordinate, an x coordinate and a y coordinate and a radius. Now these are all in pixels. Pixels are pretty darn small. So if we did something like 1 pixel, it wouldn't be very far over. So let's go ahead and figure out what would it be like to be a center x and a center y. Let's just make up some numbers for a second. So we have to give it, in this case, 3 separate numbers this time, not colors. Numbers. How do I know the numbers? Because this says an integer is coming in. Int is short for integer. That is a whole number, like 12, 16, 347,000, whatever you want it to be. And I'm going to send it with 3 separate things separated by commas. So I need an x coordinate, a y coordinate, and a radius. So let's try that in our code. Just for a second, we're going to do dot draw circle is the action name that we want to perform, the method name. And then in parentheses, you got to give it 3 numbers. Just for the sake of it, let's give it something like 100, 200, and 50. And how do we end that line of code? We put a semicolon and say, you're done. Let's see what our program looks like at this moment. So I'll run that. And we might have some weird things happen. I don't know what these numbers are going to look like. Find out. So when I run this and I go over my output, we're going to get our purple background. There is our circle. How does this work? How does this work? So 100 is 100 pixels from the left point. So this is our x coordinate. This is 100 pixels from the left. 200 is 200 pixels from the top. So we're going straight down. So this is 100 over and 200 down. 50 is the radius. How wide do you want that to be? So it's 50 pixels from the center. It came out to be white. We didn't specify white. We should probably specify what color we want it to be. So let's look at the paint class again, the painting tools, and realize there is a set fill color. Set fill color decides what color you like to be. So let's try that. Let's do paint. I'm going to do it before drawing the circle, paint.set fill color. And let's just choose one of the colors that we already know. Let's say it's color.green. Okay. And let's see what that looks like. So run that one. And hopefully we'll get the same circle, same location, but this time with green. Now what I'm going to have you do right now, once this loads, I want you to pause for a moment and realize, okay, great, we have a green circle right about there. What if I wanted you to pause and figure out, could you get a coordinate right there, just a little circle right there, and do a separate circle over here, and a separate circle down there, and a separate circle over there? Could you get 4 circles on the screen? So that's my goal, my job for you right now. Draw 1 circle on each of the 4 corners. Make each of them a different color. Practice the ability to draw circles. Before we get fully going on this, I'd like you to be able to understand how big the screen is, because it would be silly for you just to say, go draw everything and figure out where it is. So I want you to draw 4 corners, 4 circles on 4 corners, but the entire length of the screen. This screen, you can go ahead and look in the tutorial. We go to the drawing shapes. We'll find out that it's 600 across and it's 400 down. So 600 across and 400 down. So pause right here and see if you can draw 4 circles on each of the 4 corners, 1 circle in each corner. All right, let's see what I would have done. Draw 1 circle in each of the corners. So first, I'm going to go ahead and set the color of each one of them. So let's just go ahead and use color.red for one of them. We'll do a paint.draw circle. Now I want it to be in the top left corner. So I want one way up here. I want it to be the coordinate 0, 0. 0 from the left, 0 from the top. And I like it to be maybe not very big. I'll do 20 pixels wide. And I'm going to copy that. So I'll just highlight that and copy it. And I'll paste it in. I'll just paste it in with my shortcut, Control V. And I'm going to change this one to maybe green. And here we go. I want this to be way over there, way over there. So that would be 0, not 0 over, 600 over. Technically 599 would be the better answer, but we'll just leave it at 600. And that's it. That's all I want to do. Let's do the other 2 corners. Let's make this one blue. Let's say we're doing this bottom left corner. How far over that bottom left corner be? It'd be 0 over, and it'd be 400 down. I'll keep it just the same radius. And the last one, it's way down over there. I'd like it to be, let's see, let's do this one as magenta. Let's do this one as 600 over. And again, technically, it really should be 499 and 399, but it works for this particular setup. I'm going to go ahead and delete this original one so I don't have a color right in the middle of the screen. And there we go. Hopefully, when this loads, I will have 4 colors on each of the coordinates. We really need to understand what are we working with before we go and try to make the full program. And so my program, I need to probably scroll it out a little bit here. There we go. So just resize a little bit and you can see all 4 corners have a circle in it. Fantastic. If you understand that, you're getting used to the coordinate system we're going to need to be able to draw on top of it. Our final task for this particular tutorial is we'd like to create our actual sketch pad. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to get a white rectangle right in here in the middle that is not the whole size of the screen, and maybe has a little bit of a border of it, that we can get it to actually appear on the screen to have a place to draw on later. So we'll have a border, and then we'll have a place to draw on in the future. Now, how do we get to those numbers? Let's go ahead and figure this out. So go back to the painting tool. We're going to draw a rectangle this time. And so here we go. Rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and copy that if I can. Go back to my thing over here, and I'll say, okay, that's what I want to do. Want to draw a white rectangle in the center of the screen. And this is the documentation of what I saw. So I'm going to be asking Paint to do a draw rect command. I have to give it an X coordinate on the left, an X coordinate on the top, a Y coordinate on the top. So let's go ahead and use like a 30 pixels. So I'm going to do 30 pixel over and 30 pixels down. So 30 pixels over, 30 pixels down. How wide and how tall? How wide should that rectangle be? So I think how many pixels from, maybe I'm right about here, 30 pixels over, 30 pixels down. How many pixels to get all the way over to about here? Knowing the entire screen is 600 wide. And I want 30 on the left and 30 on the right not to be used. How much of the screen am I using? How long is my rectangle going to be? Well, that would be 600 minus 30, which would be 540. What would be the height of my rectangle? The entire screen is 400 tall. So 400 minus 30 is 340. I'll go ahead and delete that. And there's one last thing I'm going to do. I probably need to tell it what color I should use. So let's do a paint.set fill color to color dot. Let's make it just straight up white. So it looks like a nice paint program. And there we go. You can change the colors to anything you want, but you have just finished several lines of code that will build the background that will be needed for making our sketch app. We're eventually going to be drawing on top of this. That's such a cool starting point.
Congratulations on wrapping up day 1 of Let's Build a Sketch App. And each day to come will build on the skills you just learned. You'll end up with an awesome sketch app you can share with your friends. We have 8 more days of this Replit class. It's going to be great. And remember, if you want more, I invite you to check out BloomTech. Our BloomTech development course teaches the ins and outs of Java, along with the other skills needed to become a backend engineer. Curious? Check out bloomtech.com/Java and meet me back here for day 2 of Let's Build a Sketch App.